Hi everyone, this is Madison Brannigan at Great Outdoors Colorado. Just a few things before we get started. I am going to mute everyone on the call. If you do have any questions, there is a chat function. Erica Meyer is going to be monitoring the chat function, so you can either send your message to everyone or Erica Meyer's name will be up there. You can send it to her directly. I'll have Erica introduce herself as well.
Hi everyone, I'm Erica, the Program Officer for our Youth Initiative Grant Programs here at GOCO, and we'll be covering one of those grant programs a little bit later, the Schoolyard Initiative Grant Program. Thank you so much for joining us, for taking time to join the webinar. We hope it is helpful and informative. Please feel free to ask questions through the chat box function, and we'll either answer those directly, or if we'll cover them in a PowerPoint, we'll be sure to let you know. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And again, I am Madison Brannigan, Program Officer for our local government grants. And today, that's exactly what we'll be chatting about. We'll be going over our local park outdoor recreation mini, and Erica will chat about our schoolyard grants today. So just an overview for the workshop. We'll talk about how GOCO is funded, our 2020 funding opportunities, the application process and dates, and some resources, tips, and technical assistance to get you started. GOCO is funded by the Colorado Lottery. We receive up to 50% of net proceeds. 40% of those proceeds from the lottery then go to conservation trust funds, which we'll talk about, and then 10% goes directly to Colorado Parks and Wildlife. But that 50% that we receive at Great Outdoors Colorado is capped at about $65 million. We have funded over 5,000 projects in all 64 counties without any tax dollar support, and we are run by a 17-member independent board. So as we mentioned before, we are going to chat about our local park and outdoor recreation and mini grants, which fund new park development and enhance existing park facilities. We'll talk more about specific project components that are eligible for this program. And Erica will talk about our Schoolyard Initiative program, which funds improvements to school playgrounds and outdoor spaces. We'll dive right into eligibility, who can apply directly, and then again, what components are eligible for these programs. Eligible applicants are any cities, towns, counties, or Title 32 special districts that receive conservation trust funds. If you are not sure if you're that eligible entity, feel free to reach out to myself. My contact information will be at the end of the presentation, and I can help you with determining if you are eligible directly to apply for a local government grant. The conservation trust funds do come from Department of Local Affairs, so I can connect you with a DOLA rep or get that list for you. If you are ineligible in the case of schools, nonprofits, or unincorporated areas, you can still apply for a local government grant. You would need a sponsorship from your eligible local government. And this can look different from partner to partner, but at the bare minimum, the local government would have to be the fiscal agent where funds pass through. So if that school district or nonprofit is awarded a grant, the local government would have to sign the grant agreement. They would pass an intergovernmental agreement between that eligible entity and ineligible entity that would basically bind that ineligible entity to GOCO's grant agreement. And then the sponsor would also, again, be that fiscal agent. These are reimbursement grants, so funds would pass through that eligible entity. We'll talk more about that intergovernmental agreement and what that does need to look like. These partnerships have looked different for most of our projects, so that local government can be as involved or uninvolved as they would like to be. Sometimes it's the case where the local government helps with funding, those matching funds. They help with building the project. There's a shared use agreement, and the local government is also using the project that the school or nonprofit is bringing forward. or sometimes it's the case where it's the school district, that nonprofit that's spearheading the project, writing your grants, coming up with those matching funds. So really, we just encourage you to reach out to that eligible entity and chat with them to see how involved or uninvolved they would like to be in that process. If you're not sure who that contact person is at your local government, we're happy to pass along that information to you, so just feel free to reach out to us. Some eligible project types. This list is not all inclusive, but just some examples of projects we have seen in the past. If your project is not on the list, again, we're going to say this a lot, but feel free to reach out to us, contact me, and I would be happy to help you determine if your project will be eligible, and not only just eligible, but if your project would be competitive in our local government grants. So eligible projects and things we have seen, any really outdoor recreation amenity that you can kind of think of would fall under our local government grants. These can include community gardens, sports fields, we've seen outdoor classrooms, picnic areas, skate facilities, playgrounds. Trails that end and start on the property are eligible for local park outdoor recreation and mini. And design and engineering can count towards your match in this program. So again, these are not all inclusive, but just some examples of things we fund through our local government programs. Some ineligible project types, indoor facilities, except for environmental facilities and restrooms. We can fund restrooms in these park projects. Ineligible components are non-fixed assets, so things like lawnmowers, shovels, rakes, operation and maintenance costs, programmatic funding, volunteer time, and outdoor performing arts centers and amphitheaters. Again, this is not all inclusive, so if there are things that you are thinking of bringing to the table for the project, feel free to just reach out to me and I'd be happy to help you determine if that would be eligible or ineligible for the local government grants. Some helpful things to keep in mind before you get started is that these are reimbursement grants, so you do need to accrue some funds before you get paid if you are awarded. We do have two payment options, a progress payment and a final payment. So our progress payment will allow us to pay up to 50% of that grant amount before the project is complete. The final payment would be 100% of that grant amount. We do not require checks. We only require copies of invoices when you get reimbursed, so that's something else to keep in mind. Sometimes communities do work with contractors that also work on a reimbursement basis. So if you just have an invoice from that contractor, we can pay 50% before the completion. These are matching grants, so you do have to have some matching funds but when you apply. Again, we'll chat about that more in a bit. And then these are competitive grants. And as you can see from our last cycle, for a local park outdoor recreation and mini grants, we received 73 applications. We were able to award 23 applications. We had about $15 million in requests and awarded about $5.4 million. So we funded about 36% of the projects that came forward. Again, just something to keep in mind, you can reapply if you are not successful the first time around. It is very competitive, so don't get discouraged. And I would encourage you to reach out to staff before you begin and take advantage of these technical resource opportunities.
And similarly, for the schoolyard grant program, we received 17 applications and were able to award 8. We had 1.8 million in requested, and we awarded a little over 800,000 in funding. So about 47% of the projects were funded, which is a little bit high for this program. Next year, or this coming cycle, we expect it to be more competitive and more in line with the percentage of projects funded falling closer to the LPOR program, so about 30% of projects being funded. We have $500,000 available to award, so we'll be able to likely fund 4 to 5 schools, just depending on how much they ask for.
As Erica mentioned, for school yard initiatives, about $500,000, not about, we have $500,000 this year to award. And local park, outdoor recreation, and mini, we have $5.25 million to award. That's pretty typical from last cycle. So we're expected to see about the same amount of funding, probably 30% of the projects that come forward will be able to fund. As far as dates, applications for all of these programs are available now on our website. Applications for local park, outdoor recreation, and mini grants are due October 24th. We do read draft applications, so if you would like to submit your narrative and budget to myself, just shoot me an email with your narrative and budget. We will read that narrative, give you feedback on that application. That would be due October 4th. So we typically give about 3 weeks in order to, October 3rd. That would be Thursday, October 3rd, drafts are due. So we try and turn these around in about a week and a half, and then give you that feedback so that you're able to beef up your application before you submit the full application on October 24th. Funding decisions for this program will be March 2020, and for schoolyard.
Yeah, for schoolyard, the application is due 1 month prior to when the application is due, so December 6th. And that, again, falls in line with giving me a week to review and then to get them back to you before schools and folks go on break, winter break or vacation break. And then the applications are due January 7th, and the funding decision is March 2020.
Great. We'll dive into funding parameters and budgets. We'll go over how to fill out that budget, what matching funds look like. So for our local park, outdoor recreation, mini, and schoolyard, we do require a 25% match on the total project cost. 10% of that match does need to be cash. The remainder 15% can be in kind or cash. For local park, outdoor recreation, the maximum grant amount is $350,000. You can request any amount up to that. For a mini grant, it's $45,000. The total project cost does have to be $60,000 or less on the mini grant. No other program has a total project cost requirement. And then the schoolyard is up to $110,000. So just as an example, if you are applying for LPOR and you have a $100,000 project, GOCO could pay $75,000 of that. Your community would have to come up with at least $10,000 in cash. That cash can come from other grant opportunities. It can come from fundraising dollars, can come from school or town budgets. So wherever that cash comes from, matching is okay, or another grant is okay to match that. And then the $15,000 can be in kind or cash. We'll talk more about what in kind looks like, but that can be any donation or discount that you receive. If you have full cash match, that's totally fine as well, but we do require at least 10% of that being cash. We do get asked a question, if you just bring the minimum match, are you penalized for that? We do not score based on if you're reaching just the minimum. What we really look for is partnerships that you're bringing to the table. To us, that's more important than the amount you're bringing. We understand that some communities are able to bring more to the table than others. So we don't penalize, based on the amounts that you're bringing. We understand that smaller communities receive less conservation trust funds and, have less of a budget to bring to the table. So what we really look for is if you're leveraging GOCO with maybe the Colorado Health Foundation or a Department of Local Affairs grant, We're looking at if you've reached out to your community, if there's fundraising dollars that you're bringing, even if it's just $500 of, a potluck fundraiser. That really shows to us, though, that the community is behind this project, that they're on board, that they want this to happen. So really, we're just looking at the partnerships, that leveraging that you're bringing. Another question we get asked is if you have to have those funds in hand when you apply. You do not. We do recommend that you have most of the matching funds in hand. However, for example, if you're going after a Health Foundation grant and you do not know if you're going to receive that grant until December of 2019, obviously the local park outdoor recreation grant is due October 2019. So we do ask in the narrative a question about your match status, whether that is in hand or not. In this narrative, you just have to come up with a plan B in case that matching fund falls through. So if that Colorado Health Foundation, you're not awarded, but you are awarded a GOCO grant, how would you make up that gap in your budget? Maybe it's $10,000 you're applying for. Would that $10,000 come from the town budget? Would you be fundraising for that amount? So just how would you make that up if that money fell through? As far as in-kind funding, again, this can be any professional services, design and engineering costs within 2 years, materials and equipment. We now can count staff time as match. So staff time can be any partner on the project or that eligible entity who is completing labor. So if you're doing some site prep work, building the playground that you're applying for, that can count now towards match. We do not require documentation for the in-kind, but I would recommend it. And I forgot to mention land donation within 3 years. So if the project site that you're building on was donated in the past 3 years, you can count that towards your match. For documentation, really we're just looking for a letter on letterhead that breaks out either hours or materials, what that cost would be. So if you're using equipment from the county and say a bulldozer, and that's $50 per hour, you can just break out how many hours you'd be using that piece of equipment for and what that total would come to. Same with labor, you can use someone's salary, or if they're paid hourly, use that hourly rate. If it's salary, just break it down into an hourly rate. And we trust that you're kind of doing that due diligence and just putting it on letterhead is sufficient for us. If you do receive donation or discount and they don't have a standard pricing, what we recommend is just reaching out to maybe a rental company in your community. If, for example, the county has a bulldozer that you're using on the site and you don't know the standard pricing for that, I would just reach out to a local company that would rent the similar equipment and use whatever rates that they are using for that equipment, and that would be sufficient for our sake. And then again, some ineligible services that we cannot count towards match or in-kind are volunteer hours. We do think this is important. We understand volunteers are important to the community and projects. We asked about it in the narrative. We just cannot count that towards match. And then staff administration costs. So again, we can now count staff labor, but the administration costs cannot count. So for example, grant writing, if you can't use time that you're putting towards preparing a budget or doing payments or writing the application. And then we'll dive into the budget sheet, how to fill that out. We do require that you use GOCO's budget form. It is on our website. We have sample budgets as well. So if you're looking and would like to see a sample budget, I'm happy to share those with you. The first half of the budget, the top section, is where you're going to fill out your source of funds. The entire budget is broken out between cash and in-kind, just so we know that you're meeting the minimum 10% cash match. So the first half, the top portion of that is your cash column. This is where you're going to want to fill out all the matching funds you're bringing to the table and your Great Outdoors Colorado grant request. So do make sure that the GOCO grant request is in the correct column. That'll be the first column that you see. The second column is your applicant match. That will always be the eligible entity. So again, the eligible entity is the town, county, Title 32 special district that receives conservation trust funds will always be the applicant. The partner will always be that ineligible entity or any other funding you're bringing to the table. In this example, they have foundation funding that they're using as match, and that will always be the partner. Even if you're sponsoring an application and that town or eligible entity is not contributing any funding, that's okay, just leave that section blank, but do make sure that it's always the eligible entity under the applicant. And then you'll also break out your in-kind funding on the bottom. Same as the cash, do make sure that you're using a positive number, not a negative number. We know that sometimes the in-kind is a donation or discount, but do make sure it's positive in the budget. And then the date secured will tell us if you have those matching funds in hand or not. So if those matching funds are secured, make sure you put in a date before October of 2019. If the funds will be secured at a later date, you can either put a later date or to be determined. Do make sure that the calculations in the budget are adding up correctly. We do have those calculations in there, so they should be working for you. But if you're adding lines or changing the budget in any way, if you have more than 3 partners you're bringing to the table and you need to add a few lines, and that might mess up those calculations a bit, so just to make sure you're checking those. The bottom half is where you're going to want to fill out your use of funds, again, broken out into cash and in-kind. So do make sure the source of funds under the cash equals the total funding under the use of funds cash column as well. And we'll see what the in-kind looks like. It's pretty much exactly the same as cash, but just making sure that that you're breaking it down the cash versus in-kind. So the first column, you're going to want to organize your budget into categories. These will vary depending on project. A sports field is obviously going to have different categories than a playground. So an example here in this budget is design, demolition, earthwork, Mile High Youth Corps, utilities, and playground. If you have some site prep work that needs to go in there, this is obviously going to look different project to project, so you can kind of determine what those categories are. Under the categories, if you have a vendor you're working with, you can put that vendor under the category. If you do not have a particular vendor, at this case, we know that a lot of these projects do have to go out to bid after you're awarded. You can either just put to be determined or leave it blank. If you have a vendor that you got an estimate from, you can put that vendor under the category. Moving on to the use of funds, this is where you're going to want to break down those categories even further. So in this example, they broke down design into planning and engineering. They broke down demolition into clearing and grubbing, earthwork into excavation and embankment. So really, we just want to know what specific work is going to be completed under the categories that you listed on the left. We do want these budgets to be as detailed as possible. The reason we ask that is we want to make sure that your communities did your due diligence as far as reaching out to vendors to get estimates. We want to make sure that you can complete the projects with the amount you're requesting. And we also, compare this to the scope. and to the public planning and outreach, and we want to make sure that what your community has requested is what you are building. Moving on to the number of units, pretty self-explanatory here, but you're just going to want to break down that use of funds into units. So in this example, Mile High Youth Corps, they'll be using Mile High Youth Corps for 2 weeks, and then moving over the cost per unit, it costs $5,460 per week, and then breaking that down into whether it's GOCO ask, applicant funds, partner funds. We do get asked if, each line item has to be that 75-25 split. That is not the case. So if you want GOCO to fund $350,000 of the playground, and then all of the matching funds are the design, demolition, earthwork, that's totally fine. We just want to make sure that the total project cost, it is 75% of GOCO funding, 25% of match. Again, you're going to fill out in kind the same way, looks exactly the same. Do make sure that the total source of funds at the top of your budget is equal to the total project cost at the bottom. Again, ensure calculations are correct, especially if you're adding some line items into the budget. And then at the bottom, it will calculate match requirements for you. Again, making sure that that is accurate. And then I'll talk about application forms and attachments, all the attachments that you will need to support your narrative. So when you get the application, it will be a Word document. If you have applied in last cycle, you most likely signed onto the portal, and then you filled out your narrative in that portal and uploaded your attachments. On the back end, that didn't work very well, so we are moving back to Word document. So that Word document is on GOCO's website. You download that document. It will have all of your instructions in there on things I'm talking about today and how to sign up for a portal login. You'll fill out your complete narrative in the Word document and then upload that narrative with all of the attachments to the portal. If you applied previously in the last maybe 3 years, it was the same way where you would type your narrative, save it as a PDF with all of your attachments, upload that attachment to the portal. We just changed from last year. So once you download the application, go through those instructions. Even though you are at the webinar, I would suggest still reading through those instructions. This is the first page that you're going to need to include in your application. So this is the summary form. The top half is the applicant information. Again, this is that eligible entity always, even if there's a partner that's spearheading the project, we still need that applicant information. So we'll just need that contact name, organization name, and some contact information for that person. The primary contact information, the bottom, this is if you have a partner, a school, a nonprofit that is a partner on the project, that's spearheading the project. This is where you'll fill out the partner information below. If you have no partner, if it's the town that's applying for the project, you don't need to fill out the partner information below. But do make sure that that eligible entity, the applicant information, is always filled out. Then we do ask who the primary contact person on the application is. And there will be a checkbox on the summary form. You'll just check that. And this will be the person that I will call if I have any questions on the application. This primary contact person should be the most knowledgeable about the project. Again, this can be the partner or the applicant. So if a school district is coming in for a sports field and they are writing the grants, they are managing the project, maintaining the project, coming up with those matching funds, they're most likely going to be that primary contact, not the county who's sponsoring that application. So if that primary contact, if that partner is the primary contact, that's totally fine, just check that box. And the reason we ask this is because we can't have more than one primary contact in the system that we have once we upload these applications. It's just important that I have one contact person because when these applications do come in, I do an eligibility screening. I make sure all attachments are there. I make sure the budget is filled out correctly. I make sure that everything's signed. And then if I have any questions, this is the person I will contact if I need additional information or if the budget needs to be adjusted. So it's important that this person is the most knowledgeable about the grant. This person will also be the person who finds out if you're awarded or not. So we will send an email to this person, so make sure that if that person leaves for some reason, you update us because this is the email we'll send on our decision in March. The bottom half of the summary form is your project information, a project title, your grant request. Do make sure it matches what is in the budget, and the brief project description. This is 300 words or less. It doesn't have to be super sophisticated. It's not scored. Just a few sentences on what you are proposing and why. And we do not score this section. However, we will share it with our board if you are being awarded funding. So just make sure that really just why you're updating or what you're building and why that's the case. And then, so once you fill out your narrative and have all of your attachments, you will still need a portal login. You'll log into the portal, save your PDF, and upload your full PDF to our portal. It'll look like this. Once you sign in, you'll select file, upload that. It does have to be your full PDF, 25 megabytes or less. So something to keep in mind when you're gathering those materials. We do have a list of all the attachments you will need, which is up on the screen right now. You are able to attach more if you need, however, not required. So if you want to attach maybe documentation of public input, that's totally fine. I would recommend that you don't upload an entire master plan because that will probably not be able to be uploaded. But if you want to pull out a page from a master plan or a site-specific plan and include that, that's totally fine. But I'm going to go through all of the attachments that you will need that are required when you apply. The signed resolution from a governing body, we'll dive more in depth into that here in a minute, along with the IGA and checklist. The budget form we obviously just went over. Timeline estimate we will go over here in a minute. Letters of support we will also go over. Maps. So maps can be, they don't have to be sophisticated. They can just be a Google map of your project location and where your community is in the state. So we ask for a site map and a location map. So a zoomed out version of Colorado, putting a star on the Google map of where your community is, and then a zoomed in version of, in your community where this project is as it relates to other amenities, whether that's neighborhoods or libraries or schools, things like that. So two maps don't have to be GIS maps, don't have to be super sophisticated. If you have someone on staff, a GIS person on staff who's willing to do that, great. But again, just keep in mind that we do have the 25 megabyte limit, and I know maps can get a little bit large sometimes. Site photos we'll chat about, along with the youth core or local youth letter. So the first attachment you will need is your governing body resolution. We do have templates up on our website. Feel free to just download that template and fill in your information. If you use GOCO's version, everything that is listed here as covered, and you would not need to pass a new resolution if you are funded. But the resolution does need to state support for the proposed project and its completion, recognition of the need to provide matching funds, maintenance capability, status of property, reasonable public access, and designate a specific person to sign the grant agreement. Just some tips is when you designate a specific person to sign the grant agreement, I would recommend designating a title and not a person. So city manager as opposed to Tom Jones, because if that person leaves, you would have to pass a new resolution. Whoever that city manager is that comes in place of Tom can sign the grant agreement. Reasonable public access looks different project to project. For school districts, we understand that you might need to close the project site at specific times. When kids are in school, if it's 9 to 5, that's okay. We do require that you have the project open certain times, whether that's after school, on the weekends, during the summer, during breaks. These projects can't be locked and can't be closed off to the public. Status of property, we do get asked about that quite a bit. If, for example, you're leasing a property from the town, we would just require a lease agreement. So typically our grant agreements are about 20 years or less. So as long as you're leasing and will maintain that property for at least that amount of time, would just recommend uploading that lease agreement that you have with whoever's owning that property. If you are an ineligible entity that's applying and your eligible entity, that town is sponsoring your application, feel free to adjust this resolution. We do have a version as well for entities that are just sponsoring. That way it's not going to talk about maintenance capability, things along those lines. So if you're sponsoring an application, feel free to adjust the language or reach out and we can send you a different resolution for that scenario. Again, if you are an ineligible entity that's applying, we do require an intergovernmental agreement. It only has to be a draft at the time of application. It does not have to be signed. The IGA does need to state that the ineligible entity is applying to a Great Outdoors Colorado grant. The ineligible recipient will bind itself to the eligible entity, and then that eligible entity does not assume any obligations in the grant agreement. Basically, this IGA will bind the ineligible entity to GOCO's grant agreement. Again, we do have this template online, so feel free to download that and just fill in your information. Again, you can adjust this language if you need. I would just recommend reaching out to either Erica or myself to read it over before you apply. But we do have this template that you can just download and fill in your information. The environmental checklist does need to be GOCO's version. Do make sure you download that and fill this out completely. So this can either be completed by someone on your staff who is knowledgeable about the project and most likely has a science background that can fill this out. Or if you don't have anyone on staff like that, or if your project lies within 200 feet of any aquatic landscape, Colorado Parks and Wildlife does need to be called to come out to fill this environmental checklist out. Your Colorado Parks and Wildlife District Wildlife Manager, if you don't know who that is, we are happy to provide that information for you. So this needs to be filled out completely, signed by both the applicant and Colorado Parks and Wildlife, or the applicant and that partner. If you're not sure who should fill this out, again, reach out to us and I'm happy to help you determine that. If you have a project that you're upgrading, a 25-year-old playground, that you're uploading or you're upgrading, you most likely don't have to call Colorado Parks and Wildlife out because there's already active recreation on that site. If you just acquired a property and you're adding in nature play to somewhere where nothing existed before, that might be a good time to call Colorado Parks and Wildlife out there since nothing existed, and again, within 200 feet of aquatic landscape. And then the next attachment you'll need is a timeline. Again, does not need to be sophisticated. Just a Word document is totally fine. We have an example like this on our website. Obviously, update the dates because it's not 2014 anymore. And the tasks you can make up yourself as well. Probably correlate that to your budget. Whatever categories you filled in your budget, you can just fill in for those tasks. Again, it's going to be different project to project, so just make sure whatever is in your budget and your scope correlates to your timeline. These projects do need to be completed within 2 years of the award date, so that's from March of 2020. Again, don't have to be super sophisticated, but you can use GOCO's template online. And then we'll dive into application questions. So as far as our review process, all of these applications are scored on a 100-point scale. So we do have a score sheet that we fill out when we read each application. Every question does have a points allocated to them, and you will see how many points are allocated to each question in that application. Once applications do come in, we group them by region. The reason we do this is because we do want to make sure that larger communities are not competing with smaller communities. So last year for our local park and outdoor recreation, we had 8 groups. For mini, I believe we had 3. So typically it's going to be a Denver Metro group, 1 or 2 Eastern Plains groups, a Western Slope, Northwest and Southwest Colorado, so that you're competing against applications that are like communities. We do get asked if we allocate money based on region. We do not. It tends to work out that way just based on the way we group these applications, that our funding does get spread throughout the state. We do not allocate specific funding for specific regions, but just based on that system, it typically gets spread throughout. So once applications come in, we do send out a solicit email for peer reviewers. So we have peer reviewers from across the state also reading these applications, people like yourselves, so parks and recreation directors, we have people from school districts, we have grant writers, we have people who are completing these projects on the ground who are knowledgeable about these types of projects. So we rely on that expertise and those partners to also read these applications with us. So 2 GOCO staff members will read every single application, Erica and myself, and then we have 3 peer reviewers read these applications as well. So we'll most likely have 40 to 45 reviewers come in, and we also split them into regions. So we will make sure that the peer reviewers are not reading the region that they're in. So if you're located in the Denver metro area, you're not going to be reading Denver metro applications. You'll most likely be reading applications from the Western Slope or the Eastern Plains so that there's no bias there. So 3 peer reviewers will also read every application, and each reviewer will most likely read about 10 applications in their group. So once we give reviewers and ourselves about 2 to 3 months to read these applications, then we'll sit down in meetings and discuss each individual application and if we would score it, if we would fund that application, why or why not. we ask those peer reviewers for comments, and we do give back your score sheets if you were unsuccessful. And we are also happy to set up a meeting to discuss feedback with you, and I can discuss what I heard during those meetings. I typically take notes during those meetings so that I can give feedback to unsuccessful applicants. So again, if you are not funded this round, don't get discouraged. You can reapply, and we can help you be more successful next time. And then just based on how we fund, our 2 staff scores will average together to form a staff score. The 3 peer reviewer scores average to form a peer review score. Then our staff score and peer review scores average to form a composite score. And then we'll go down the list and fund as many projects as possible with the funding we have available. And just to give you an idea, we cut off funding at about 85 last year. So projects that were scored 85 and above, and it might even been a little bit higher, it might have been 87 and above, were funded. So also something to keep in mind when you're going through the application, that all of these points are really important, and every point that you can get does matter. If you're interested in reviewing for us, we would love to have you, and hopefully it's a great way to kind of learn GOCO's process on the back end, learn about what other reviewers are looking for, learn what GOCO staff is looking for. So it could be a good way to learn about GOCO if you have never written a grant in the past. So feel free to reach out, and I would be happy to add you to our peer review volunteer list. So we'll dive into the questions, what makes an application competitive, what we're looking for in each question. And again, the points are right next to those questions. So you can see the point system allocated. When you download the application, you will see the full prompt. It's not just going to say, hey, your community project scope. It'll ask you specific questions when you download the Word document. But I just put the prompt on here for space. The local park, outdoor recreation, and mini grants are the exact same. They have the exact same questions. So if you're, whatever program you're deciding between, they do have the same narrative. So the first question talks about your community, 10-point question here. This is where you're going to want to describe your community, including any demographic information or population data. You'll want to talk about the recreational interests of your community and how those recreation interests tie to the project that you are proposing. You want to talk about how your community is unique. And we ask these questions because, again, we have reviewers from around the state who are reading your application who may have never been to your part of the state. So you really want to describe this to people who may have never been to your specific town, your specific county, or even a neighborhood in your city. So keeping in mind that peer reviewers are reading these applications, so putting in that demographic and population data is important because those reviewers might not know that information. And we use that population information throughout the application. You'll also want to talk about users, specific users who are going to be using the project that you're proposing. So these can be community groups, organizations, sports teams, and again, being as specific as possible here, and not just stating that local sports teams are going to be using the project, but what specific sports teams. Is it a school sport team? Is it a recreation district sports team? What specific schools are going to be using it? If you're proposing fitness stations with a walking loop, are there fitness programs? Are there trail groups that might use it for running? So being as specific as possible here is important. And the reason we do ask you to be specific and we ask this question about users is because we want to know who's demanding the project. We want to make sure that these projects are community-driven and that your community is the one who is a part of this process and who's demanding this project. So you just want to make sure that these community groups, these local nonprofits, these sports teams are on board, and they're the ones that are demanding this project. We also want to, we also ask user numbers. So how many users you estimate that are going to be using that site either per day, per year, per month, and you can kind of make up that estimate based on if it's an upgrade, past user numbers. If it is a new build, you can look at other sites that you have in your community and base it off of that. If you don't have a particular component that you're adding, you can reach out to other communities that maybe are similar size and see how many use that site. We don't score based on sheer number. That's why that population information is important that you put in your community description, because we base that user number off population data. So if you have 100 users that are going to be using the site per week and you have a population of 1,000, that's quite a bit of users per week. So we really base that user number off the population discussion. We don't penalize small communities because they don't have as many users as larger communities. Moving on down to project scope. This is a 15-point question. You're going to want to describe exactly what is going to be built in your project. So talk about prep work that needs to be completed, quantities of what you'll be adding, materials for each component, describe dimensions. So being as specific as possible here. We'll pull out that budget form and score the budget next to the narrative. So do make sure that everything you listed in your budget is talked about in that narrative, even if it seems like a small thing. So if you're adding picnic benches, 2 picnic benches, talk about that in the narrative and why it's important to be adding that to your site. If you're adding shade structures, you know, even if it's only a few $1,000s for a $2 million project, that's still important. Why is that being added in there? And it only needs to be a few sentences, but still talking about that. We really want to make sure that the scope is something that reflects your community outreach. So that's why we ask you to be as specific as possible. You also want to talk about consultations you've had, how this project came about, why you chose specific elements, again, reflecting the community outreach that you did. This is also where you can add some site photos. You don't need to add it into the narrative, but that can be an attachment. Don't use that to talk about the project site. For example, don't say see photos, but maybe a few sentences of the project site, and then you can direct people to those photos. Consultations, these can come from vendors that you've reached out to, or it can come from other communities that might have put in a project that you're thinking about. So if you want to put in a splash pad in your community, but there is no splash pad in town, you're not sure what maintenance will look like, you're not sure the exact project cost, or even who to reach out to as far as vendors, definitely reach out to other communities who have done that, see what worked well for them, what might not have worked well for them. We're also here as a resource. We have a list of consultants we can send you, a list of vendors we can send you as well. The access question, this is where you're going to list where users are in relation to the site. How will users access the site? Are they biking, walking? Is there public transportation along the project site? Again, we get asked, you know, we're a rural community, no one's in walking distance. That's okay. Talk about, you know, how users are going to get there. If they are driving, how many parking spots are there? If you listed that 200 people are going to be using the site per day, and no one can walk to the site, everyone has to drive, do you have enough parking space to accommodate 200 users per day? And so again, just relating it to those user numbers and the user groups and where they are in relation to this project. The need question is you're going to talk about how users are compensating for the lack of a project now, how this project will enhance recreational offerings in your community, and why this project is needed now, the urgency behind the project. So if you're updating a project, let's say there's a playground that's 30 years old, it's degrading, it's dangerous, it's rusted out, there are pieces you have to keep taking out, and your insurance company is not going to insure it any further, or your insurance company says this needs to be taken down immediately. You can talk about, that the playground is past its useful life, that it's dangerous and unsafe, and really not meeting the needs of youth in your community anymore. If, for example, you're putting in something completely new, maybe it's a new sports field, talk about why that's needed. Maybe your recreation district can no longer host tournaments or games because you have too many youth that are in baseball or soccer. Maybe you're turning youth away because you have no more sports fields to accommodate those users. So talking about, that maybe users are driving 25 miles one way to get to practice because that's the only sports field that's open now. So that's a barrier for a lot of people to get into after-school activities or to go to games and practice. So talking about those barriers and how this will enhance those recreational opportunities for your users that you mentioned in question 1. You can talk about any programming that might take place at the site if you're putting in an outdoor classroom, for example. Maybe there's nature classes that you're going to be hosting. Maybe the school down the street is going to be using that classroom for programming. So talking about that programming and how those users that you mentioned in question 1, those specific sports teams, those specific nonprofits, how they're going to be using this site. We really are asking here, how will this project enhance connections and experiences in the outdoors for your community? And this is also where you're going to want to talk about urgency, why you're completing this project now. Planning and outreach, again, a 15-point question. We do require that the public process takes place before applying. Your project will not be competitive if you have not done that public planning and outreach. We ask that this be completed prior to applying because we want to make sure that these projects are the priority for your community, that these projects are being demanded by your users. So we want to make sure that this is not a top-down project, that your board is not saying this is what we need, but this is a community-driven project, and that you had community meetings, you did that work, and this was what your community has prioritized. We asked how your community was involved in elevating this project as a priority for GOCO funding, discussing any master or site-specific plans that you have. If you do not have a master or site-specific plan, that is okay as well. But you want to talk about, how you reached out to the public and how it became a priority if you do not have that master plan. How are meetings advertised? What specific feedback did you hear? How many people came to meetings? We've definitely seen some really unique ways that people have done public planning and outreach recently, because we know that not everyone comes to meetings, and typically it's the same person or same group of people reaching out, sending emails, coming to those community meetings. Unique ways of public outreach have been really competitive in the past few rounds. It's been pushing applications towards the top. So if there's any ways you can do, door-to-door knocking and asking what your neighbors want to see in their parks, doing events, things like barbecues, or we have seen communities that go to the project site that they are redeveloping and talking to users that are using the playground now. What do you want to see in this updated playground? We've seen communities do have translators. We've also seen communities that do, with youth, they go into classrooms or do youth-specific outreach. We understand that most of these projects are youth-driven, and those are going to be the main users of this project. So do they have a voice in this planning and design? If so, how?
And we'd like to see more than one way of community outreach and one result of community outreach. So if you're just doing surveys, if possible, we'd like to see outreach in other ways as well to make sure that we're getting the most holistic and authentic input from the communities.
Thank you. Great. So if you did, your due diligence, as Erica said, you did that outreach and multiple points of outreach. The next question we have is opposition, because we know that there will most likely always be opposition. That is okay. We just want to know that up front. Are there neighbors, user groups, or parties who are opposed to the project? Include any of that documentation of opposition if there is any. If there is opposition, what have you done to help address those concerns? Maybe if, the neighbor doesn't want lights shining into their house past 10 o'clock, how are you compensating that opposition? If there is no opposition, awesome, even better. But we want to make sure that if there is opposition, you are addressing it. If still you address that opposition and that neighbor just doesn't want this project, will never be on board, that's okay. Just make sure you're talking about that in the narrative. The maintenance question, this is where you'll talk about how your community will maintain the project once it's built. We do need a number here, so how much funding is going to be used towards maintenance per year or per month, and what will maintenance consist of, whether that's raking, shoveling, cleaning up trash, doing visits to make sure the the playground is up to par. The youth involvement question, we talked a little bit about that for the planning and outreach, but this can really look a few different ways. One way that you can get your full 5 points here is if you hire Colorado Youth Corps Association, one of the youth corps in your community. This program, there are youth corps throughout the state. 18 to 25-year-olds are hired to work on projects like this, typically site prep projects. They are completely trained. They do get a living stipend, so they are paid for this work, which means that you would have to pay for the Colorado Youth Corps Association, a youth corps, to come out and do work on the project site. But that is one way to get full 5 points. Another way is to include your local youth. So this honestly, I think, makes projects more competitive, getting local youth involved in the project. So whether that is maybe planning and outreach, is that having them help with design of the project, and maybe that's helping with fundraising. How were they involved in that way? Maybe there's a cleanup day on the site. Maybe they can help with planting and landscaping on that project site. So youth need to be involved at least some way in your projects, and we understand that they might not be able to be out there doing construction, but they can at least help with some form of engagement in the project. Moving down to match status, this is where you'll talk about the match you're bringing to the table, whether that is you have that full match, whatever those partners are that you're bringing to the table as well. So if you have full match in hand, state that you have the matching funding secured and where that is secured from. If you do not have your matching funding in hand secured at the time of application, you do want to talk about that in this match status question, and also talk about when you're expected to receive that match funding. And this is where you'll talk about that Plan B in case the match funding that is not secured falls through. So if you, again, are applying for Colorado Health Foundation grants, you're not going to find out until January of 2020. It's $25,000 of matching funds. If GOCO is awarded, how are you going to make up that $25,000 in matching funds? If all of your funding is in hand, you do not need to come up with a Plan B. Obviously, it's all in hand, so you're good there. This is also where you'll talk about those partnerships that you're bringing to the table, any leveraging funds that you're bringing, why those partnerships are important, and why those partners decided to come on board with the project. If you reached out to every local business in your community, you asked them to donate to the project, but you just had a project a year ago and they're strapped and they can't do any more as far as donations, talk about that here too. Why, maybe they're supportive, maybe they're volunteering. That's where you can talk about that volunteer initiative. Maybe they are supportive of the project, but they just can't contribute any funding. You can talk about that in the match status discussion. Moving on to the funding need. This is where you'll, again, focus on financial need of the project. What will be lost if the project is not undertaken now in this grant cycle? Maybe you have matching funds that will be lost. Maybe you will not be able to gain matching funds next cycle. So again, focusing on those finances and why you're applying to GOCO, why the need for $100,000, talking about the budget. Maybe you fundraised for as much as you could, and that's you came up with $50,000, and that's where you need the additional funding. So really focusing on that financial need here. Timeline, we do ask for a narrative in the timeline. We know that there's an attachment. Make sure you're discussing any design, engineering, or permitting that's outstanding. We recommend your project being mostly designed and engineered. It doesn't need to be 100% designed and engineered when you apply, but as you can see, we're funding the most urgent and needed projects. So projects that are more far along in design and engineering are going to be score better than projects that still have, maybe 75% design and engineering outstanding. So timeline here, you're going to talk about how you can get this project done in 2 years, what that timeline looks like. If you do have maybe 15%, 10% design engineering outstanding, that's okay. These projects are awarded in the winter anyway, so maybe you're going to use those 2 months to go out to bid, finish the components and specific design and engineering there, and just talking about that in the timeline discussion. And then letters of support. We do ask for unique letters of support, 7 letters from community members that are supporting the project. So typically we see letters from the users that you mentioned in question 1, those nonprofits, those sports teams, the groups that you specifically mentioned in the Your Community discussion. We also love letters from neighbors. So any neighbors, anyone who is involved in that public planning and outreach process. Letters from youth are also really compelling. Again, these are probably the users of the project. So if you can get letters from youth, and that shows support for the project. We assume that because you passed that resolution that your town council or your board members, elected officials, the mayor, they're all on board with the project. So we really are looking more for community letters here, not necessarily letters from elected officials. And we also ask for a youth support letter, so that doesn't need to count towards those unique 7 letters of support. The youth support letter just talks about any specific group or nonprofit that is involved in the project, as far as the youth involvement question that we talked about earlier. So that doesn't need to count. And any financial letters do not count towards the 7 letters of support. These are just community letters stating support for the project. And then I'll have Erica dive into schoolyard.
Awesome. So the schoolyard application is a 10-question application similar to Madison's, and we'll go over those questions next. The program is really meant to inspire physical play and enhance learning at schools. So the grants are for up to $110,000. And the hallmark of this program is that the process is led by youth. We want to make sure that youth are proposing the project components and that whatever they want to see on their playground, since they're the main users, obviously within reason, that they'll be able to see. So the student-led process looks a little bit different at each school, but we do require that each school have a student-led process, and we have examples of that in the application and in past successful applications on our website. The most successful applicants have a really strong and authentic youth and community engagement. The application also provides opportunities for playing and learning, and for example, that learning can specifically tie to curriculum at the school. The one thing about the Schoolyard Initiative, as Madison kind of mentioned earlier, schools aren't eligible to apply on their own for this program. They must partner with their local government for them to sponsor the application. And the involvement of the local government and the school looks different on a case-by-case basis. But at the bare minimum, we do ask that the local government signs the grant agreement, passes a resolution, and if funds are awarded, they do act as a pass-through for the school. And if grant funding is awarded, then schools are eligible to use up to $10,000 of that $110 to finalize any design documents. Okay, so here are the 10 questions. A lot of these are similar to the ones that Madison mentioned, so I'll try to spend less time on those and more time on the unique questions. So the community, tell us about your school and the surrounding community. What makes it unique and vibrant? Where are you located? How many students attend the school? Is it K-5, K-8, or is it a high school? And I should mention that this program, we mostly fund elementary schools through this program, but we've also funded middle and high schools. So any school is eligible to apply. And in this question, we're also looking for the free and reduced lunch rate at the school and the income data of the community. The access question, we're just looking for, is it easy and safe to access the school and the playground? Are there any barriers? Are there sidewalks, fences, things like that? Again, if you're in a rural or small community and the school is a place that you have to drive to, that's totally fine. Just be sure to discuss that in this question. The need question. So why do you need a new playground? Is the equipment old, outdated? Is it unsafe? Has your student body doubled in size, for example? Is some of the playground not age appropriate for the students who are there? Do you not have a community playground currently? And/or do you need to improve ADA accessibility? The youth and community engagement question. So they're two separate questions, but they really follow along the same prompts. So as I mentioned earlier, youth and community engagement are two of the most important questions. We're looking for projects where students were given decision-making power and not merely asked to vote on playground options of what they like best. As I mentioned, they're the primary users of this space, and we want to make sure that we're meeting the needs and desires of students and the community. Because schools are sometimes the closest areas in a neighborhood, we see residents and community members as stakeholders as well. So how can the new playground provide a space for the community members? For example, in one of the past projects that we funded, there was a retirement home across the street from the school and the school playground, and students from their youth task force, which is what they created to address that youth engagement piece, those students went and visited the residents and asked them what they would like to see, and told them about the project and wanted to know if there's anything that they could incorporate to meet the needs of the residents. And the residents at the retirement community asked for a walking trail and a garden. And those two components were included in the proposal that they submitted. And that was a great way to showcase community engagement and meeting the needs of community. Other things we've seen requests from community is increased shade and seating at school playgrounds, not just for community members, but also for teachers to use as well. So the scope question is just specifically around the project scope. We want to see what we're really looking for here is that the things that the youth and community are asking for are included in the project scope, and that the response to this question directly ties back to the previous two questions on what youth and the community were asking for. As Madison mentioned, we're looking for as much detail as possible in this question, and we want to make sure that not only does this question tie directly back to feedback you heard, but also that it aligns with the budget as well. So there's no questions about what's proposed and the cost of those things. The next question is about ongoing use. So how is the playground going to be used during school hours and after school hours? Are there going to be opportunities for teachers to take learning outdoors? How will the community and neighbors be welcome to the playground once it's built? You know, we really see these investments in school playgrounds as not just benefits for students, but we also see them as an investment in a community and a neighborhood, and want to make sure that the community and neighborhood have access to that. So in the past, we've seen schools do things like block parties or host their back to school night outside, things like that. Any of those creative things you can do to increase participation and help activate this space is great. Letters of support, so similar to Madison, these are really community-based letters. We don't as much need letters from elected officials, well, that's okay to include. We really want to see letters from parents, from teachers, from students, community members, etc. For the schoolyard initiative, you can include up to 10 letters of support. And then financials, just why do you need GOCO funds? Why is this a priority for the school, for the community, and what would happen to the project if GOCO funds aren't awarded? And then the maintenance question, as we mentioned, GOCO cannot fund maintenance, so just making sure that we're thinking about this at the application phase and what the cost estimate of maintenance is going to be and who's responsible for that. Typically, that isn't a huge issue for these projects, given that schools and school districts have maintenance budgets already. So this grant program, like the other ones, are extremely competitive. It's important to start with these steps before applying. We also have a step-by-step how to apply guide on our website. And if you're interested in that guide, it's just one page, 10 steps. Feel free to shoot me an email and I'd be happy to share that with you. But first, most importantly, discuss the project with the school leadership and the district. Sometimes we see these projects spur out of discussions at PTO or PTA meetings, or sometimes with students and teachers themselves. Either way, that's totally fine. We just want to make sure that the school leadership and the district is supportive of the project. Then we ask that you contact GOCO staff. So please reach out to me. Give me some just brief information about your school, the current playground situation, and that way I can let you know if it would be a competitive project. And then we ask you that you contact your local government, since they're going to need to sponsor and act as the official applicant. And as Madison mentioned, if you're not sure who to contact, we'd be happy to share contact information with you. The next important piece is securing matching funds, because these grants, like all of our grants require a 25% match. It's important to start getting those matching funds in place. We don't ask for a 100% match in hand when you applied, as Madison mentioned, but we do like to see some funds are secured. That way we know the project is pretty shovel ready. And then after all of that, then you can start the 10-question application. All right, and I'll turn it back over to Madison.
And I'll just chat really quick about some other grant opportunities that we have. One being our planning grant. This planning grant is up to $75,000. We do run it in the summer, which is a change from previous cycles. So those applications next year will likely be out April 2020, due June of 2020, and grants would be awarded September 2020. So the planning grant opportunities are for communities to develop master plans or site-specific plans for their communities. We talked a lot about that public planning and outreach piece, design and engineering documents. We understand that all of those pieces are expensive. So if that's something that is a barrier to your community to getting these construction projects done, we do have that planning grant opportunity. I'm happy to chat more about this. If you want to shoot me an email, we can set up a time to talk and I can go over these questions. It is only 4 questions, so smaller, less than our local park outdoor recreation and mini grant application. But I'm happy to chat more about this program with you if you would like. And then just a few other ones that we have are Youth Corps grants. We talked about Youth Corps again in the narrative questions. We do run a Youth Corps program, and this is for communities to hire Youth Corps on projects. These are things like noxious weed removal, trail building, trail maintenance. You can hire a crew for the amount of work, weeks that you need of work. You wouldn't get funding directly. However, you would get the crews to come out and essentially get that labor for free. So if that's something that you're interested in, I also help run that program. I'm happy to answer those questions for you. Our Connect initiative is our large trail initiative. We are in the middle of strategic planning right now. We will know more about our Protect initiative, Connect and Inspire, most likely at the beginning of next year, hopefully maybe January to March of 2020. We should know more about these programs, but our Connect initiative is our large regional trail grant that's up to $2 million. And then our open space programs, I'm happy to direct you to our program officer that runs those programs. But these programs help conserve large ranches, working ranches, or public open space. So again, happy to direct you to the program officers for those programs. Some helpful tips before you get started. Again, contact GOCO staff before you begin. We're here to help. We do send out sample applications. So if you would like to see a sample application before you begin, we're happy to send that to you. We can give you a project that's a similar scope and similar sized community. We do, again, read draft applications. We would suggest submitting the draft application for pre-review. Keep in mind that the process is competitive and you can reapply, and we do send feedback to you if you're not successful. Some things not to do, they might seem pretty self-explanatory, but do not respond to NA to any application questions. Don't refer to attachments to answer a question, especially the timeline question, for example. We do still need a narrative there. Don't just say see timeline attachment. Make sure you're giving some narrative before you refer people to the attachment. Those letters of support should be included in your application. don't send those letters to the GOCO office, but just include them in the larger PDF. Make sure you're listing one primary contact, again, whoever's the most knowledgeable about the project. And then because our portal system, sometimes technology can be a little bit wonky, make sure that you're trying to create that portal login as soon as possible. Again, all of those instructions on the portal are in the application. It's a step-by-step guide to take you through how to get a login and how to sign up for that and how to upload your application. But I would recommend trying to work with the portal a little bit earlier than the application deadline. But again, we're here to help. If you have any technical difficulties, we don't want to turn you away because of that. So just give me a call, reach out, shoot me an email, and we can help you with filling out your application on the portal and uploading that. This is just our contact information, Erica and myself at the bottom there. Matt Brady, he's a grants officer at Great Outdoors Colorado. If you are awarded a grant, he will be your contact person. And then Chris Farrell is the our program officer who runs the Stewardship and Trails program. So if you have any stewardship or trail projects in mind, he would be the best person to reach out to there. But I'll leave this slide up so that people can have our contact information. We'll stay on the chat function for a little bit if anyone has questions. I'm going to sign off on the phone. But again, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me via email or phone or Erica as well. But I'll sign off here and we'll stay on to answer any questions you guys have right now. Thanks again for joining. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join us for the webinar. So thank you very much.
Yes, thanks again so much for your time and for staying through a webinar. We know it's not always easy, but we so appreciate it. As Madison said, contact us with any questions in the future. Thanks again.